welcome to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Julie, how are you?
Doing great. I cannot believe that it's already the end of February. Spring will be here very soon.
Yes,
Crazy.
spring is sprung. It's definitely warm here in Atlanta. I don't miss the cold, so I'm hoping it will stay, but I'm sure we'll get another dose here pretty soon.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So look, we have a full episode again today, right? We've got the exciting topic, and I'll give you my explanation of why I say it's exciting. The topic of the business cases. I'm being sarcastic if you can't tell. I don't love it. I think it's a lot of it's scary. It's scary to me. The times that I've done it in my career, and I've learned a lot about them. But yeah, I'm excited to dive into that. I know you have a lot of point of views on that, Julie.
Oh, now I know I'm a real geek because
Yeah.
I actually thrive on something that's scary.
Yeah, I just don't dig it. It's a confidence thing, I think, sometimes, and the more you do it, right, the better you get. But I've actually, I've been a part of a lot of really good cases and people that have done them really well, and I've learned a ton. So it is less scary, but yeah, not my favorite thing. So I'm excited to talk about it because I think we're gonna learn a lot. We've also got some market updates, a couple of them. I thought we could jump into those if that's okay, Julie.
Yep, let's do that first.
All right. So look, a first one, this one's probably a little negative, right? We're starting off with another big organization going through big transformation, having, some challenges that have reached the media, right? And that's always awful, right? You don't want this as a leader or an employer, period, right? No matter what your size is. But just to give you some characteristics of this, and then I'd love to get your opinion, Julie, just being on the front lines of this is, you've got a big organization, big retailer. We won't name who it is, working with a big tech provider, going through very public, infrastructure transformation across their organization, multi-year, big gnarly stuff. Has payroll errors, right? There's mistakes with paychecks, coming out with missed hours. There's some overtime concerns, people not getting paid fully, some misinformed or poorly communicated pay slips aren't showing all the details. So there's just a lot of angst here. And, I was curious, Julie, because we've seen probably a handful of these, right? I know we've talked about it in the past this summer. There's been a handful of these big public blunders, if you will. How do you stay out of the media, right? How do you do this and not get into this situation? And do you think there's who's to blame, right, in this case? And I don't know if we know the answer to that entirely, but would love to get your opinion here.
Yeah, the first thing I've learned is there's seldom, just someone to blame. Well, folks want to turn, very quickly to the provider or the technology or it's usually a combination of factors. And, I guess it might be equally negative to say it probably happens more often than you might think. That these big transformations get started and then something derails them. And there's a lot of differences in where they get derailed along the way. But at the end, it's not a great place to be derailed because it's pretty high profile.
Yes.
As this combination or this situation is finding. And I do think, one of the things that struck me about this particular retailer situation was, oftentimes you're doing a broad HCM technology upgrade or technology change, and HR and payroll are tied so closely together that that folks will have an inclination to say, well, let's do both, of course, or on the other side of the spectrum, be terrified to do both and do one or the other. And I think in this case they did both. And so right away, you're taking on some additional risk. And the other thing I would say is, oftentimes when things fail at a large scale, you're trying to transform or trying to change or try to consolidate and build something new to replace multiple, old things.
Yeah.
And so, they tell you in transformation, 101 school, if you're trying to transform to something that doesn't exist, it's like you're trying to hit this moving target, right? So
good point.
It just struck me that was a part of this situation too. Was I think there were multiple systems, legacy systems, and things in place, and they were moving to a new environment that didn't exist, and they were moving everything all at once. And it's like, well, that has all of the risk factors, right?
Yeah. You hate to see this. Like, I hate to see this for the industry. I hate to see it for the company, for the employees that work there. All around, this is just awful. And I think you're right. There's probably a little bit of culpability, on all parties here that could have done better. But in fairness here, in full candor, right, we're all about authenticity here. I've been on the bad end of this before
Yeah.
myself
Yeah.
as a practitioner. Yeah. Looking back, it's kind of funny now because the way it was presented by the media personality that was involved, it was quite funny. But at the same time, it was also, when I look back at that, yeah, we had made some mistakes, but more importantly, we just communicated really badly.
Yeah.
And I think that was where, had we maybe communicated better, or at least thought it through a little bit better as a group, as a leadership team, we might have actually prevented some of the angst that came out of the small errors that we had caused in this case. But yeah, you hate to see this. So any thoughts on how you react to this? How you handle this?
I do see, a typical culprit for sure is, timeline. So I
Yeah.
have yet to walk into many client situations or prospect situations where they're planning this transformation. They're like, oh, we're doing it with, enough time and then some, for contingency. No, like everybody wants to, oh, I can maybe squeak it in 6 months when it should be 9, or, 12 months when it should be 18. And so that right there is probably what is a red flag um, for any
Yeah.
big transformation when you're trying to jam it in. And then it's just I don't know how to avoid it. I think you avoid it like the plague. But if you're starting to see signs and you have teammates or team leads that are throwing up red flags and saying this just we are not on target. We are not on target. You can only ignore so many of those before you get caught with your pants down.
Yeah,
Right?
agreed. And I also, reading into this a little bit further, the company was a bit public with what they were doing in terms of their investor communications, and they pointed out that they're taking on efficiencies across customer service, merchandising, sourcing, payroll, accounting, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that right there, that sounds like ERP to me, and it probably covers a lot more than just those words each describe, right? Payroll alone, and they've even pointed out many systems being consolidated and tackled here. So I wonder if maybe there's almost too much scope. Potentially, could be
Yeah.
part of it too. Maybe being a little bit more deliberate
Yeah, and
maybe
I
could
do
have
think,
helped.
so your big things to avoid are you want to do anything that avoids, losing your workforce. And if workforce doesn't get paid, you're at risk of losing them. Those are big giant no-nos. And then there are a lot of other ways you can mess up, but it's still recoverable under that, right?
Yeah,
And the highest profile ones, because this certainly isn't the only one. Tesla, where all of the payroll team quit, that was pretty high profile. And I'm working with a healthcare. I've been working with a healthcare firm that was not on their first go live transformation. Right, many folks fail 2, 3 times trying to get to a new, very brave new world, and that can happen. And I heard a new definition of success from a colleague of mine who
uh-oh.
works in the automotive, who said, well, we went live with a payroll, and and the first pay cycle we were in the national news. The second pay cycle we were in the state news, and the third pay cycle we were in the local community news. And so we can see progress,
Oh,
but it's tongue in cheek.
good
But
grief.
it's no fun when you're looking at that as a reality that you have to then manage through, right?
Yeah, it's hard, man. These are so demotivating to see. Yeah, and that's I mean, goals, right? Wow, they're really progressing, but hopefully you don't make the media at all. That's the goal here. So,
That's
look, I
right.
hope this doesn't discourage others from going on this journey. There's more successes than there are failures, in my opinion, at least in my experience. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
think that's
you know,
right.
stick with us. We'll teach you more ways to stay out of this trouble for sure. And we'll share our blunders as we go.
For
So,
sure. Hey, let's
yeah.
before we leave market news, Pete, I wanted to ask you a little bit about a new global EOR marketplace consortium that you've been close to, and I think I just read this morning a fresh blog out by you to give some more details. But I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit of insights around what that's all about.
Hey, everybody. Got a quick question for you. Is your job easy, stress free, and full of rainbows and sunshine every single day? Yeah, I'd say that's a big fat no. Hi, I'm David Noe, host of Speakeasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners, and proud to be part of the Work Defined community. Take a step down into my Speakeasy live on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we tackle HR and business challenges through raw, uncut, unfiltered conversations. This is HR like you've never heard it before. Bold, real, and full of practical takeaways. Real guests, bold insights, authentic conversations that drive change. Catch every episode on demand through your favorite podcast platform or all the content at speakeasyhr.com.
Yes, gladly. I'm super passionate about this space. You know, I've covered it, advised in it, and just a huge fan of the global EOR model. I think it's a huge agility enabler for organizations, and I just hope that it stays that way. You know, yes, the news this week. Well, actually, I think it came out last week. Is that four of the biggest firms in the EOR space, the employer of record space, including Safeguard Global, Globalization Partners, Velocity Global, and Papaya Global have all gone in together and created this new consortium called the GEIO, which is the Global Employment. Now I'm forgetting it. I need to pop up on my thing here. Help me, Julie. I've forgotten the name.
Global Employment Innovation Organization.
There you go.
GEIO.
The GEIO, right? That's a mouthful. So the beautiful part is, I fumbled that, but the beautiful part is this is a much needed nonprofit consortium that is really coming in with the goal to mature, elevate, and expand on the ecosystem of global employment service providers, really giving them that much needed support and structure for, through standardization, advocacy, education, and research. And that's going to really bring a bit of some order to this space, right? I've talked a lot about how it's very Wild West. It's very opportunistic. There are more providers than there are there is time to even go through all of them, and they pop up every day with limited, if any, differentiation or capabilities sometimes. So this is huge. I was very fortunate to be a part of conversations back in 2021 with then, founders of Safeguard Global, Globalization Partners, and Velocity. And we talked about this. They came up with this idea of this potential for this consortium. So to now see that fast forward a few years later, it's been brought to life. I think it's a huge step forward for this industry, and just love to see this sort of structure and maturity coming into the space.
Yeah, and thanks for writing about that so quickly. It was one of the things that I love about getting to know you is your transparency. And I was just on in the HR Tech virtual summit space here earlier today, and ran across a new name in the EOR space that I wasn't familiar with, and had a link, and sure enough, it's popping up. They often pop up in some of these different analyst reports and squares and things. Like, well, that came out of nowhere, and there are a lot of dangers in this space in particular, because everybody thinks they're in it, and maybe not to the same degree. And there's so many new things popping up in this market. So I'm glad that you're bringing a little bit of caution and awareness to folks.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, this is look, just a final reminder here. I would say to take away is this is a very much a deep compliance service, right? You shouldn't be buying this for any other reason than their compliance capability. There's a lot of slick tech, a lot of slick marketing out there, but go behind it, right? Kick the tires, see what the capability is to actually execute what you're doing. Because this is, there's a reason why a lot of the biggest HR outsourcing firms have avoided this, right? There's a risk to this. And you just love to see the growth, but let's make sure it's safe and no one's going to get hurt. So yeah, check out the blog and let me know what you think. And certainly I'll obviously be keeping an eye on this marketplace. I've been writing and researching on it since 2017 and big fan of it. So want to see it thrive.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about our topic this week, business cases. And let me give you a little bit about why I have angst about it. So imagine this, the payroll guy is not a numbers guy, but I don't love numbers, to be honest with you. They scare me a little bit. Business cases scare me, right? You've got to get it right. And I've always likened the business case to transfer. And tell me what you think, Julie. It's like the homework or the practice you have to do before you can go and play the game, right? Like my kids, it's a good example. My kids are a few of my kids are the types, they don't want to go to practice. They just want to go to the game. And they're like, why do we got to do the practice? And I'm like, because that's part of how you get ready to be in the game. And so, it's one of those things where I think for me, it's always been the homework or the practice for getting ready for the game. I don't know if you would agree with that, Julie, but an essential piece, right?
That's a fun analogy, and I do think it's essential for sure. And I think it's especially challenging in HR because a lot of HR folks are just not numbers folks, right?
Yeah.
Some of us are, but HR plus analytic skills, HR plus number skills, right? Those are a little bit more uncommon. And so we like to just kind of tell ourselves, oh, it's about the quality and we want the right thing and it's not about the money. And it is, at some point in time, it is about the money. And so you do need to do your homework. The question is, will you do it ahead of time and, kind of walk through things in a measured way? Or, will you kind of plow in, burn into things, and then, get to the point where I really have to, okay, now somebody's asking me for this. And how am I going to spin it when I know what I'm trying to get?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's so essential, right? I mean, like you said, it's got to be, it's just a step in the process. And it's very critical, right? You've got to be able to justify what you're doing, that you got to have a why behind it. And a lot of times you also got to have the, why now, why this here in this moment. So yeah, very, very good stuff. So where do you start to do this? Like where does it begin, Julie? What is your suggestion?
Well, I think it might be an obvious place, but it's not a place that folks start often enough for my liking, and that is challenging or at least addressing and taking a look at the status quo. So when you're making a business case for change, what you first have to do is recognize what is the status quo. Ideally, you also have to, quantify it, and so you might hear practitioners say a base case or the cost baseline, which is kind of your starting point. Your here's what it is now, and then you really have to think about what are the things that make the status quo undesirable or unpalatable.
Good point.
Because inaction is always easier than action, and and there will be costs involved and change involved in moving, and so what is it about your current state that is unpalatable, and how then are you going to start to think about framing up the value proposition for the thing that you want to move to?
Yes, good point. So the problem statement, right? Getting to what we're trying to solve here is very key. Yeah, and one of the things I've seen too, I mean, I think this is probably pretty obvious, right? It almost sounds very textbook, but the better you can show the pain, but also show how it's going to tie into the overall organizational strategy beyond HR, is going to get a lot more attention than if you just sort of go in with this complaint, if you will. Yeah. And just sort of asking for money for the sake of doing something, right? So yeah, I think you're right. You have to have a really good understanding of what you're heading off to solve.
The other thing, there's always an inclination when you start to get into the idea of adding a technology or adding a provider, to do something, whether it's HR or functional, payroll only, there's an inclination to want to get in and figure out, okay, which tool or which provider, and then compare them.
Yeah.
Right? So, quick to get into RFP or RFI scenarios and why this one over that one. And really, where you're going to get challenged first and foremost is, well, why not what we're doing now? Why is that so awful? And so, put your head around that first, because you will get to the why this versus why vendor X or vendor Y. But you first need to get to, well, what if I just do nothing for a year?
Oh, good grief. Yeah, we got whole topic, a whole show on that one. So let me ask you a question, Julie. So before you even start off, because I want to dive into maybe the mechanics of what makes up the business case, but before you get going, should you be thinking about stakeholder buy-in even at that point, or are we better off to maybe go and make a case and then try to gain that buy-in? Because that's a huge part, right? If you
pace of change in the world of business is fast, and that drives incredible complexity for the world of human resources.
Welcome to the HR Data Lab's Brown Bag Lunch, a series of conversations with experts inside and outside the world of human resources on how to innovate, measure, and evolve our practices.
Our goal is to help provide you with practical examples of how HR has to change and to meet in this complex business environment.
Every week, we'll talk to new and different voices on all aspects of human resources.
And guess what? You get to chat with us live.
Live?
Live.
So they can answer questions or they can ask us questions?
They can ask, they can answer, whatever they want. They get to talk with us live.
That's awesome.
Sometimes we geek out on the data and technology that underlie the processes that drive the world of HR.
But the conversations are always insightful and fun. So please, enjoy the HR Data Lab's Brown Bag Lunch.
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, that's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find them anywhere.
If you've got proponents and you've got people who are on your side championing your cause, I guess you could say, the change, and you've got some buy-in, at least from folks that matter in the ecosystem, I think you're going to have a lot better success. So what do you say to that? How do you do you do that first or do that after?
Yeah, well, I would say you need to do it first.
Yeah.
Whether you actually approach anybody or engage anybody is a different thing, right?
Okay.
But if you really want to affect a change, you need to think about your stakeholder map, right? Who are the stakeholders? And the bigger the change, like a full HR transformation or a full suite of HR technology or services, the bigger the stakeholder map. And then there are groups like payroll or global payroll where the stakeholder map is just extremely challenging because it may not be owned by HR.
Yeah.
There might be operations, there might be finance, there might be shared services. And so if you're a good leader of the engagement or the transformation, you're going to figure out whether you need to approach somebody right away or not. You're going to figure out who all is impacted, where might power struggles be. If you're buying a technology, what is IT's role versus HR's role versus finance's role? Who ultimately is making the decision? Who ultimately pays the bill? And get your ducks in a row. I would also say that project management is certainly a valuable skill set. Program management for bigger transformations. But if you're not tapping somebody for your change in the organization that really understands and can work a network of very diverse stakeholders, especially global companies on a global scale, you're going to hit some bumps along the way. So, and that's not a common person. Not everybody can play in the global multifunction stakeholder pool, right?
Yes. Yeah. Great point. No, that's a great point. Yeah. And the change element of this, we've talked about that ad nauseum, I think, on this show. Most firms just don't have that capability in house and need help. So yeah, 100% love that part. So let's maybe you could take us through some of the mechanics of what's included in a business case. And then I have a few questions too along that path, but maybe you could just kind of talk us through maybe the core pieces that you see being critical and the mechanics of it.
Sure. So when I think about the business case, I first think about something I just mentioned earlier, base case or cost baseline. And that is really an inventory of the different components of costs that exist as part of your current solution for whatever it is that is in scope. And if you think about costs and gathering costs, they're really going to come in, 3 or 4 flavors.
Mm-hmm.
In HR, you always have your people costs. And so, there's direct FTEs, and then there's folks that are engaged in some fractional way that might not be direct FTEs or fall into a certain budget, but they certainly do perform activities that support whatever your scope of work is. So you've got to think about both types. And then you have to think about your third-party costs, which involve your technologies and your systems or your systems and your providers. So that's a discrete cost as well. And then a whole bunch of other internal costs and allocations, which we know you might not be able to really affect very much or impactfully. But those are things like rent or facilities charges, or laptops and equipment and network for teams that are doing something today, and even leadership overhead, right? So those are kind of the big pools of costs that typically are in your environment today somehow, and you get a line of sight to those so that we can start to figure out how might they be impacted.
Yeah. How do you make sure that you have everything included? Because one of the things I've seen, especially in global payroll, is a lot of times payroll will not be able to really get their fingers and hands on every cost. And then cases will fail in the first pass. And then once we go in with some help, they dig, and get some guidance and get do some more looking and structuring, I guess, of what they're doing. And they find, oh, we didn't know we had this thing here and that thing there. And before you know it, there is a case because they just didn't have it loaded all the way with everything that they needed to. So how do you do that? How do you make sure when an organization doesn't have a good line of sight to what they're spending?
Yeah, well, So it's a great question. And, I don't know, maybe today's podcast theme is going to be scary things, right? Because you're right. When you start to talk globally, you want to look for the big material pockets of things. So large countries have larger FTEs, larger systems, and larger spend. Smaller countries are doing it with, fractions of stuff and sometimes manually with nothing. So you do have to kind of follow and ask questions to try to figure out where things are and what costs you can even get at. I'd say there's a couple of different approaches here because we know, and you gave a great example, the best example, global payroll, for example. You might have, one of your accounting and finance firms that is covering payroll for a handful of folks, right, in country, and they do that, and there's no visibility to what that cost is, but it's something that's added on to the cost of your finance and accounting charges to them. It's important to at least know that. Now, you can try to get it an allocation, but the reality is maybe that cost will never go away, right? You could say, oh, I don't know, like a few hours every month, and so maybe it's a few $1,000s, and 5 figures or something a year. It could be that much, but you're not gonna cut your budgeted costs by
Yeah.
by moving that work. It's just a part of a bigger piece of work that's thrown in. So you want to know and at least be aware of where the costs are and when you're unlikely to find impactable costs. Let's talk about it as impactable versus costs you can't really impact. And to me, the most important thing to know when you're assembling that picture is if a lot of your costs are not impactable, then you really need to be cautious about seeing a story of business case savings, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You might have efficiencies, you might have productivity, you might have an awful lot of, less risk, no single person's risk or outdated technologies and compliance risk. There's a lot of business value, soft value that you have. But, be real. If you're not going to find savings, now you doubly understand why you need a business case because you're going to have to sell an investment and budget dollars spent from some centralized organization where you're not taking dollars out of somebody else's HR budget.
Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned the soft savings too, right around efficiency. Sometimes that gets lost, I think, in the end result, in the bottom line too, right? You have to be very careful of that. So yeah, no, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. So what, Julie, when it comes to things like big transformation, right, is the case any different than it is if you're going out and say just solutioning one service, like say global payroll, or maybe just buying, not just, but going out and selecting an HCM system or something like that? Is there a difference in how you look at it?
Yeah, so there can be a number of different ways to look at it. The first thing that I'll say is, maybe easiest to look at is if you have a technology solution or a service provider in place today, and you're looking at a scope that displaces or replaces that, you have a much easier time of saying, okay, well, here's what my cost is today, even if it's legacy and I don't pay anything, risk. I know that I don't have much cost. And here's the future cost of that technology or that limited service.
Yeah.
Where I think people get tripped up more and more today is we see a lot of big T transformations, right? And in a big T transformation, there are many different things that are changing. In fact, arguably, fundamentally, you're changing how you operate. And so it's not a matter of replacing one third-party cost with another third-party or one internal technology with an external third-party cost. It's actually looking at each of those components, and probably the most challenging one in a big T transformation is the staffing cost.
Yes.
So there we're talking about people don't do the same things that they used to do before. So I won't go so far as to say, we have this many folks out in the field, we can get rid of those folks. No, you're changing their jobs. You can't get rid of part of the things that they're doing.
Yes.
You need to add critical mass in other areas. And so the dynamics of the cost shifting in and out always leads stranded cost or unimpactable cost, and really requires some expertise to try to articulate.
Yeah, good stuff. What's stranded costs? What do you mean by stranded costs?
So stranded cost is, for example, let's say that I'm going to take a global payroll situation, and let's say I have 10 different countries,
Yep.
and payroll is a part of a job in each of those 10 different countries. Let's say maybe it's even a quarter of what a person does. So
Yeah.
I might take out a quarter of an FTE in each of those 10 countries, but I can't, on the whole, take the equivalent of, 10 times a quarter out of the budget operations. I still need those folks probably,
Yes.
unless they
Yeah.
re-engineer their jobs. And I am freeing them up so that they can be productive and, maybe I can articulate that value, maybe I can't. But I'm going to replace kind of a soft cost and soft efficiency and productivity with a hard dollar cost on the other side where I'm seeking a technology or a provider.
The BARF. Breaking news, acquisitions, research, funding. It's the week that was. It's a wonderful way to catch up on the week that was the week prior. Kind of a John Oliver-esque type of show. Ryan and I pitch each other's stories. We laugh. It's fun. You can watch it on YouTube, but you can also subscribe to the podcast. Give it a listen. Give it a look. Thanks.
Yes, that's a great point. Back to my efficiency comment earlier. That's a great point. I've seen some folks get caught up in that, and you're right. There's ROI all around, right? You really just have to make sure you're articulating it properly and calculating it, at scale the right way.
Yeah, and the tricky part of that is that's just on the ongoing, right? So that's the ongoing effort where, you have that dynamic. You're going to add some ongoing incremental costs likely in some situations. If you have older no technology to new, and intuitively, you're going to add costs, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Scattered resources to some centralized handful of resources that you need to hire. Of course, you're going to add some centralized operations costs ongoing. But many folks ignore that or, think mostly just about the one-time implementation costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you make a good point about getting help, but should you ever let your provider help you? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? 'Cause I've been on the provider side and helped, buyers with their cases in some spots. But how do you feel about that? Is that sort of um, the wolf leading the hens to the hens to slaughter, or what? I mean,
It certainly can be, right? So
yeah,
most providers out there in the ecosphere have, in some way, shape, or form, kind of stood up a business values group or a consulting, some type of a consulting arm,
yeah,
in response to the fact that clients or prospects really do want some help in this space. So it's not all nefarious, right?
yep,
And they do have details and information, and I'll say anecdotal more than anything, thoughts about where savings are coming from based on where they've seen them come from other clients or other business cases. So there's certainly some value in that, and a resourceful project lead or HR payroll lead is likely to go ahead and deploy or use some of those resources. That's a good
right,
thing.
right,
I do want to mention, though, that there are a number of drawbacks to that as well. And so you just want to be aware. When you start working with more than one provider, you're not in a sole source situation anymore. I know many organization that has found themselves with 3 or 4 different provider-led business cases. Everybody's creating their own version of
yes,
the truth. They're trying to
ah,
piece something together to make their own business case, and it's just a royal mess by the time you start to get in and dig into it, right?
yeah,
So that can happen. And then you said it right off the beginning, the fox and the hen house. Just know, like they're not on the hook. Providers are not on the hook for a realized business case, or something
that's
that
true. That's a great
something
point.
becomes true. So efficiency numbers, productivity numbers, you have to take those with a grain of grain of
Salt.
salt, and you have to think about how they fit in your environment. It's something that advisors do all the time. They're the kind of middleman that doesn't have a horse in the race. So I feel I've always felt like a pretty good neutral source. But I'm also more often in that role, the source of telling a client, why are you expecting these dramatic, huge, hard dollar savings? Because let's look at it.
Yeah.
This is harder than it looks.
Yep. Being realistic. No, that's a good point. Good point. So look, to maybe wrap this up, this has been great, Julie. I know I'm learning. I want to ask you more, of course, but just to kind of round this out, right? Like, okay, we talked about how, we've talked about why, we've talked about what to do. So what happens if you fail, right? We've had an episode on the do nothing buyer. Hopefully you don't end up as a do nothing buyer, but business cases do fail. I've seen it. You've seen it. And from time to time, they recover, and generally they do. Right, next pass, they work on it and they move forward. But what do you do? How do you recover from that? And what do you suggest in those cases?
Yeah, there are a few things to do. Sometimes you need to cast the net a little bit more widely, right?
Yeah.
And I say that not only functionally. That's why a lot of times companies do look at a big T transformation or look at a buy that is broader than they can deploy in a single wave, is because you need to cast the net more broadly so they hit bigger fractions of cost and can pool those together. That definitely happens. So that's one angle. There are angles when I work with folks on the business case, and they'll say, you know what, it's just we can't impact rent and facilities and lease costs. There's no way it goes into the business case. And you're right, you can't impact it, but it doesn't mean that it's not a cost there. And to make the story that shows all the cost and then it explains what's impactable and what's not impactable is important to do, because providers have to put those costs allocated into their offerings. And so you're not working with apples to apples if you don't acknowledge that those costs are there, whether you can impact them. I think that's important. And then just have somebody with an experienced eye take a look at it and see what you're missing. Another tactic that I really like to use with HR organizations in particular is let's look at business values and let's see which of those business values, productivity, efficiency, deferred technology upgrade costs in the future, which of those can we make an argument for? Which of those can we quantify in some way, shape, or form? And what if we take a shot at 10 or 12 different things? Maybe 2 or 3 of them will stick, and you can make a semi-soft, right, or a semi-hard dollar argument as part of your business case, and that can be a way to get things through the end.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a way, right? You can recover. It's not the end of the world, and it happens. I mean, we've all been a part of it, so that's excellent. So, Julie, any closing tips or lessons learned, or anything that you'd add further that we haven't already talked about?
I just say don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. Don't be scared. Even if it's not your core competency or you don't think in numbers, just know there are places you can go. You don't need an engagement to ask some peers or to reach out and get some advice and some thinking and bounce some ideas around. It doesn't have to, when it's scary is when you close your eyes and you pretend it's not there until the very last minute. That's when it's scary. It's not scary if you start looking at it from the get-go.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it is, again, it's the catalyst that's going to help you start your change and get you on your journey. So yeah, I love it. Good stuff. So thank you for sharing this, Julie. It's been great.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So look, before we wrap up, everyone knows where you can find us, right? Always be sure to connect with our various channels. You know where we are. The blog today we talked about, you can find that on the gxtadvisors.com website. And Julie, are you going to be at any events coming up soon?
Just making plans right now for the APA this week, I think, is airing a payroll solution showcase.
Yes.
So I have a session called The Great Separation there. And my next in-person will be in Orlando in March 21st, 22nd, 23rd for the Shared Services Week. So if anyone's heading down to that, please reach out.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes. A solution showcase at the APA. I think this is the 3rd year. I've been a part of that every year myself. I believe you may have as well. Yeah. A great program. I did one earlier, I'm doing one early in the week. I believe it's on the 1st, if I'm not mistaken, or the 2nd, I think, or is it the 2nd and 3rd? I can't remember. Do you remember, Julie?
I don't remember. I think mine is airing.
I think it's the 2nd and 3rd. Yeah. So look for that. And then I'll be at the iSolved Roadshow here in Atlanta on the 15th of March. And then the 16th and 17th, I'm blessed with another event, ADP Meeting of the Minds, one of my favorites, that is also here in Atlanta. So 2 in my backyard that I'll be at the week of the 15th of March. So would love to connect with anyone that's out there at those events.
Absolutely. Same here.
Awesome. Well, it was good as always, Julie, and we will be back very soon.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
I get it. The podcast just isn't enough. That's all right. Head over to your favorite social app, search up Work Defined, WRK Defined, and connect with us.